The black man walked into the restaurant he had built from the ground up, but the manager saw only his skin. "You don't belong here. Leave." He smirked, thinking he'd won. But when the man calmly pulled out the ownership papers, the smirk vanished. And the next words out of his mouth? They would destroy the manager's entire career. The air smelled of garlic and seared steak, the familiar scent of success. James Carter paused outside the restaurant doors, the very ones he had fought for years to own. He ran a hand over the sleek lettering on the glass. Carter's Steakhouse. His name. His legacy. Yet, as he pulled open the door, stepping into the warm glow of his empire, he was met with something colder than the air-conditioned dining room. A sneer. "Excuse me?" The restaurant manager, Todd Franklin, a stout man with a permanent scowl, was already walking toward him. His narrowed eyes flicked over James's casual attire, dark jeans, a fitted sweater, polished leather shoes. It wasn't the clothing that made Todd bristle. It was who was wearing them. "Can I help you?" Todd's tone was tight, forced politeness barely masking something uglier underneath. James smiled, taking in the restaurant that had once been a run-down, struggling steakhouse, before he turned it into the finest dining spot in town. He had poured everything into this place: his money, his sweat, his mother's dreams. He had worked in the kitchen, bussed tables, charmed investors, and built it from the ground up. Yet Todd looked at him like he was nothing. "Just here to look around," James said, his voice even, betraying nothing. Todd's lip curled. "Well, if you're not here to eat, I have to ask you to leave." James raised a brow. "Excuse me? We have a dress code and a very selective clientele," Todd said, voice dripping with condescension. "I can recommend a few places more suited to you." "A few places. More suited." James felt the words sink into his skin like hot needles. He had heard them before, spoken in different ways, wrapped in different tones, but always meaning the same thing. "You don't belong." A few tables over, a white couple in casual polo shirts and khakis laughed over wine. A group of businessmen, jackets draped over their chairs, sipped cocktails near the bar. No dress code seemed to apply to them. Todd folded his arms. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Now." James exhaled slowly. He had come here hoping to observe, to understand the staff, to see the inner workings of his business. But now it was personal. He reached into his coat pocket, his fingers grazing the smooth edge of a very important document. This manager, this man who thought he held the power here, was about to learn the truth. James's fingers tightened around the document in his pocket, but he didn't pull it out just yet. No, he wanted to see how far Todd would take this. Todd's arms were still folded, his expression smug, as if he had just won some unspoken battle. Around them, the restaurant buzzed with conversation, the clinking of glasses and the low hum of laughter filling the air. None of the patrons noticed the tension crackling between the two men. James let the silence stretch, watching Todd squirm under the weight of it. The manager shifted his stance, clearly uncomfortable with how calm James remained. "Sir, I don't want to repeat myself," Todd said, his voice dipping lower, more urgent now. "I'm asking you to leave before I have security escort you out." James finally let out a quiet chuckle, not out of amusement, but out of sheer disbelief. Security? In my own restaurant? He took a slow step forward, closing the gap between them. "And what exactly do you think security is going to do, Todd?" Todd's brow furrowed. He wasn't used to being questioned. "They'll remove you, sir. We don't tolerate loitering." "Loitering?" James cut in smoothly. His voice wasn't raised, but it carried weight. "I walked into this restaurant, my restaurant, with the intention to dine. But before I could even sit down, you decided I wasn't worth the seat. So tell me, Todd, what exactly makes me different from the other guests here?" Todd's face flushed. I don't make the rules. It's just policy." James tilted his head. "Policy?" He pulled his hand from his pocket, finally revealing the ownership papers. The heavy linen paper practically glowed under the warm lights of the restaurant. Todd's eyes flickered down to the document, confusion knitting his brows together. "What?" James held the papers between two fingers and offered a small, knowing smile. "Policy is my decision to make, Todd, because you don't work for some corporate boss. You work for me. The blood drained from Todd's face. The smirk, the bravado, the thinly veiled condescension, all of it vanished in an instant. James took another step forward, lowering his voice so only Todd could hear. "Now, would you like to ask me to leave again?" Todd swallowed hard. The power dynamic had shifted entirely, and the weight of his mistake was finally sinking in. James didn't move. He wanted to hear Todd say it, to hear him try and fix what couldn't be undone. And judging by the way Todd's lips parted, the apology was coming. But was it too late? Todd's throat bobbed as he swallowed, his gaze darting between James's calm yet commanding stare and the document in his hands. The silence between them felt thick, like a noose tightening around Todd's career. The restaurant, still bustling with conversation, was oblivious to the unfolding storm at the front. But that was about to change. "Mr. Carter, Todd stammered, his voice weaker now, lacking the arrogance it had dripped with just minutes ago. I didn't know." James tilted his head slightly. That was the excuse. "You didn't know," he repeated, voice smooth but laced with quiet disbelief. "Didn't know what, Todd? That a black man could own a restaurant? That someone who looks like me could build something like this?" Todd's lips parted, but no words came. "Let me make something very clear to you," James continued, stepping even closer. His voice didn't need to rise. It carried authority all on its own. "You looked at me and decided I didn't belong. You didn't ask for my name. You didn't ask if I had a reservation. You took one look at my skin and decided I wasn't worth your time." The tables nearest to them were starting to quiet, guests beginning to sense the shift in the air. A few curious heads turned. James didn't care. Let them hear it. Todd opened his mouth again, desperate to backpedal, but James didn't let him. "This restaurant stands for excellence, for class, for respect," James said, his voice unwavering. "And you? You represent the opposite of that." The color drained from Todd's face. His breathing had turned shallow, panicked. He knew what was coming. "Mr. Carter, please, I can fix this," Todd pleaded now, scrambling to salvage what little dignity he had left. James exhaled sharply. He had seen this too many times before. A racist man, full of swagger when he held the power, now begging when it was stripped away. "You can't fix what you never saw as broken," James said, finality in his tone. "You don't just get to apologize when you're caught. You don't just get to beg for forgiveness because you fear consequences." Todd's hands trembled. "Please, I need this job." James studied him for a long moment. If this had been years ago, if he hadn't worked twice as hard for half the respect, maybe he would have been merciful, but not today. "Todd," James said, tucking the ownership papers back into his pocket, "I need employees who treat every guest with respect." Todd's lips quivered. "I can learn. I swear." James cut him off with a slight shake of his head. It was over. "You're fired." The entire restaurant fell silent. The weight of those two words hit Todd like a bullet. His face contorted into shock, then devastation, before settling into the grim realization that there was no coming back from this. James turned slightly, locking eyes with the stunned hostess behind the podium. "Call security," he said. Cool, controlled, in complete power. Todd flinched like he had been struck. He knew there was nothing left to argue. James let out a slow breath as the weight of the moment settled over him. He had built this place from nothing, only to be treated as if he were nothing. But now, standing tall in the restaurant he owned, he had made one thing clear. He belonged. And Todd. He was nothing more than a bad memory. As Todd stood frozen, his face drained of color, the realization of what just happened sank in. He had lost everything. The restaurant, once alive with conversation and laughter, had fallen into a stunned silence. Eyes flicked between James and Todd, between power and defeat. The staff near the bar whispered in hushed tones, their faces a mix of shock, unease, and, on some faces, satisfaction. James turned to the hostess, a young woman who had been watching everything unfold with wide eyes. "What's your name?" James asked, his voice calm yet authoritative. Melanie," she stammered, still trying to process what had just happened. James nodded. "Melanie, do me a favor and call security to escort Mr. Franklin off the premises. Immediately." Todd flinched at the finality in James's tone. Melanie hesitated, looking between them, then nodded quickly. Right away, Mr. Carter Todd's eyes darted around the restaurant, searching for allies, for someone, anyone to defend him. But all he saw were blank stares, some even satisfied smirks from employees who had clearly been waiting for this day. Todd, James said, shaking his head, you had a chance to treat people with respect, but instead you chose ignorance and arrogance. He took a small step forward. Let this be your lesson. Racism has consequences. Todd's jaw clenched, his hands balling into fists at his sides. For a brief moment, James thought he might lash out, might try to reclaim some sense of power, but then Todd's shoulders sagged. He knew it was over. Security arrived within minutes, 2 large men in black polos who didn't even need to say a word. One simply gestured toward the door. Todd scoffed under his breath, then turned his glare back to James. You'll regret this. James didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. He just let a slow, knowing smile curve on his lips. No, Todd, you will. And with that, Todd Franklin was gone. As soon as the doors shut behind Todd, the tension in the room broke like a fever. A slow clap started from the bar. One of the chefs, a broad-shouldered man with tattooed arms, smacking his palms together with deliberate approval. Then, one by one, others joined in. First, a waitress, then a busboy, then customers, businessmen, couples, families, until the entire restaurant was applauding. James looked around, surprised. He hadn't expected this, but he welcomed it. Melanie, still standing near the host podium, grinned for the first time that night. That was amazing. James chuckled, running a hand over his chin. It was overdue. One of the waiters, a young black man in a crisp white shirt, approached with uncertainty in his eyes. Mr. Carter, does this mean things are going to change around here? James turned to him, meeting his gaze head-on. Absolutely. He looked around at his employees, the good ones, the ones who had worked hard and treated guests with kindness, only to watch someone like Todd poison the environment. James stepped forward, addressing them all. From now on, this restaurant is run with one simple rule. Every person who walks through those doors is treated with respect. No exceptions. The wait staff exchanged glances, nodding. A few smiled, relief visible on their faces. They had been waiting for this change. Then James turned to Melanie. By the way, you handled yourself well tonight. She blinked, caught off guard. Oh, thank you, Mr. Carter. You ever considered moving up? I need a new manager. Melanie's eyes widened. A few gasps rippled through the staff. I don't know what to say, she breathed. Say yes, James said simply, offering her a real chance. And for the first time that night, Melanie stood a little taller. Yes, she said, voice steady. I'd be honored. James nodded, satisfied. Tonight wasn't just about firing Todd. It was about setting a new standard. And as he looked around the restaurant he built, he knew this was just the beginning. The energy in the restaurant had shifted completely. The dark cloud Todd had cast over the place was gone, replaced with something James hadn't felt here in a long time. Pride. As he walked through the restaurant, he noticed the subtle changes already taking place. The waitstaff stood a little taller, their interactions more relaxed, free from the fear of an overbearing manager looming over them. Real smiles replaced the forced ones they had worn under Todd's reign. At one of the tables near the bar, an older black couple, one of his mother's longtime friends, gave him a knowing nod. He returned it, feeling an unexpected lump form in his throat. This restaurant was built for people like them, like him, and now it would finally be a place where everyone belonged. James made his way back to the host podium, where Melanie was still standing, her hands gripping the edge as if she were trying to steady herself. You sure about this? She asked, her voice softer now. I've never been in charge before. James smiled. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to lead with respect, something this place has been missing for a long time. Melanie let out a small laugh, shaking her head. Well, that I can do. James clapped her on the shoulder. Good. First order of business. Staff meeting tomorrow morning. I want to hear from everyone. The way things were before, that's over. Melanie nodded, a new determination settling in her features. James turned and scanned the restaurant. already mentally making notes of everything that needed fixing. It wasn't just about firing Todd. It was about rewriting the culture. As James was about to head to his office, the door opened again and a new customer walked in. A black man in his mid-40s, dressed in a tailored suit, paused at the entrance, taking in the upscale atmosphere. The man glanced around, hesitating, as if bracing himself for rejection. James saw Melanie step forward, her first real moment as manager. "Good evening, sir," she said, offering him a warm smile. "Welcome to Carter's Steakhouse. Do you have a reservation, or would you like to be seated right away?" The man blinked, surprised. Then, after a moment, his entire demeanor softened. I'd like a table for one," he said, almost cautiously, as if he wasn't used to being welcomed so easily in a place like this. "Right this way," Melanie said, grabbing a menu and leading him toward a quiet booth near the window. James felt it then. The change, the shift, the future. This wasn't just about one man losing his job. This was about turning this place into something bigger than just a restaurant, something his mother would be proud of. And as James finally stepped into his office, taking a deep breath, he knew. Tonight was just the beginning. The air in the restaurant felt lighter, like a storm had passed and left behind a clear sky. James watched as Melanie led the new customer to his seat, her confidence growing with each step. The man's initial hesitation faded as he settled in, scanning the menu with a small, appreciative nod. James turned to see the rest of the staff quietly watching, absorbing the shift in energy. They weren't just witnessing a policy change, they were witnessing a culture change. He cleared his throat and spoke, addressing them all. "I know tonight has been eventful," he said, offering a small smirk. A few chuckles rippled through the group, breaking some of the lingering tension. "But let me say this, I don't just want this restaurant to be successful. I want it to be a place where everyone feels welcome." The staff exchanged glances. Some nodded. Others let out small sighs of relief. James continued, "That means we treat every single guest with respect, no matter what they look like, no matter what they wear. We are here to provide excellence, not just in the food, but in the way we treat people." He let his words sink in before adding, "If anyone has a problem with that, you can leave now." A hush fell over the group. No one moved. "Good." James gave a firm nod. "Then tomorrow morning we meet before opening. New leadership, new rules. Any suggestions, concerns, you bring them to me. We build this together." A slow clap came from the kitchen. One of the chefs, Marcus, the grill master, grinned. "About damn time." The staff chuckled. Even Melanie smiled, her confidence settling in. James exhaled, finally allowing himself to relax just a little. The night wasn't just about firing Todd. It was about setting a new tone. And from the looks on his employees' faces, they were ready for it. As he made his way toward his office, he overheard Melanie greeting another guest, her voice steady and professional. This was how it should have always been. And now, it finally was. James stepped into his office, shutting the door behind him. The muffled sounds of the restaurant, a place he had poured his soul into, buzzed on the other side. It was different now. Lighter. Better. He exhaled, running a hand over his face before turning toward the framed photograph on his desk. His mother. She stood in their old kitchen, flour dusting her apron, that same warm smile on her face. She had dreamed of opening her own restaurant, but life had never given her the chance, so James built one in her honor. And tonight, he made sure it stood for the values she had raised him with. He picked up the frame, his fingers brushing over the glass. "I did it, Ma," he whispered. "And I promise this place will be everything you dreamed it could be." A soft knock on the door pulled him from his thoughts. "Come in," he called. Melanie stepped inside, still clutching her notepad. She looked different now, stronger, more sure of herself. "Sorry to bother you, Mr. Carter," she said. She hesitated. "I just wanted to say thank you for believing in me." James smiled, setting the frame back on his desk. "You earned it," he said. "And it's James, not Mr. Carter." Melanie nodded, a flicker of pride in her eyes. "Oh, and one more thing," James added. "Tomorrow let's put together a team meeting. I want everyone to know that change isn't just happening. It's here." Melanie grinned. "I'll take care of it." As she turned to leave, James leaned back in his chair, a deep sense of satisfaction settling in his chest. For the first time since opening Carter's Steakhouse, he felt something he hadn't felt before: peace. And as the night settled outside, one thing was clear. This was just the beginning of something greater. The hum of conversation, the clinking of glasses, the occasional burst of laughter. Carter's Steakhouse was alive in a way it had never been before. James stood near the bar, watching as his vision unfolded before his eyes. The restaurant was thriving. Every table was filled. The once tense staff now worked with genuine smiles, and the atmosphere radiated warmth and inclusivity. The change wasn't just in policy, it was in spirit. Melanie, now fully confident in her role as manager, walked through the dining area, checking on guests with ease. She had grown into the position beautifully, a natural leader, respected by both staff and customers alike. At one of the corner booths, Marcus, the grill master, chatted with a group of loyal customers who came every weekend. His laughter boomed across the room as he shared a joke, his previous tension under Todd's rule now completely gone. James smirked, shaking his head. This was what he had fought for. No more hushed discrimination, no more toxicity, no more looking over his shoulder in his own restaurant. A familiar face walked through the doors, a young black couple hand in hand, their eyes scanning the restaurant with awe and curiosity. James took a deep breath and stepped forward. This time he would be the first to greet them. "Welcome to Carter's Steakhouse," he said, his voice filled with pride and warmth. "Table for two." The woman nodded, smiling. "Yes, please." Right then, James knew. This wasn't just a restaurant anymore. It was a statement, a legacy, a home, and it was only the beginning. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass as James walked through the cemetery. The sun had just begun to set, casting a golden glow over the headstones. He stopped in front of a familiar one, his mother's, Evelyn Carter, a woman of grace, strength, and love. James let out a slow breath, kneeling down as he placed a small bouquet of white lilies beside the stone. Her favorite. For a long moment he just sat there, letting the quiet settle around him. "I did it, Ma," he murmured, his fingers tracing the engraved letters. "Carter's Steakhouse is finally what you would have wanted it to be." His mind drifted back to the nights she spent in their small kitchen, humming as she cooked, dreaming of a restaurant where everyone felt at home. "6 months ago I almost lost it," he admitted, shaking his head with a chuckle. "But I wasn't just fighting for me. I was fighting for you, for everyone who's ever been told they don't belong." A warm breeze passed through the trees, as if the universe was listening. James sat in silence for a moment longer before standing, brushing the dust off his jeans. "One more thing," he said, smiling softly. "We added a new dish to the menu, your Sunday pot roast." His throat tightened. "People love it. You'd love it too." He turned to leave, but before he did, he rested a hand against the headstone, his voice steady. "I'll keep making you proud, Ma." As he walked back to his car, the sky above turned a deep, rich orange, a sign maybe that she already was. And as long as Carter's Steakhouse stood, so would her legacy.